All right, everybody, welcome back. This is the final chapter of Unit 3. Yay, land-based empires are done with. Well, not really, but yay. All right, so Bellwork on the screen. What are two influences China had on Europe as a result of trade? Hint, hint, think cough, cough, and boom, boom. If you know, you know. Anyway, we'll be back in just a second. Okay. So yes, today we are going to finish up Unit 3 by looking at another big land-based empire. This time it will be a land-based empire that uses gunpowder, but is not a gunpowder society, is not a gunpowder empire. It's going to be our boys, the Russians. Yes, we are going to look at the history of Russia between really the 1300s all the way up to the 1750s. We're going, or a little bit beyond that, actually. All right, yes. So we're going to look at Russia today. Specifically, we're going to pay attention to this idea of how and why various land-based empires developed and expanded. So think about how is the Russian Empire developing itself and how is it expanding itself? And why is that? All right, so who are the Russians? Where did they come from? Well, we've been dancing on the edge of the Russian Empire for quite some time. I think we first introduced them when we discussed the Kievan Rus all the way back then. And one of the kind of factors that led to the decline of the Kievan Rus was its kind of forced tribute status under the Mongols. Yes, the Golden Horde. The Golden Horde, as you remember, was the Eastern European state that was established by the Mongols. Excellent. Yes. So yes, the Golden Horde, remember, is that is or not Islamic, that Muslim is that Mongol, sorry, I just talked about the Mughal Empire, is that Mongol Empire in Eastern Europe. But remember, one of the things of the Mongol Empire was that it was extremely decentralized. Remember, they had a system in which tribute was collected through a central figure known as the Grand Prince or Grand Duke, or Grand Prince rather, the Grand Prince of Moscow. Moscow was a major trading city. It's also sometimes called Muscovy, kind of. Oh, shoot. Wow, okay. Give me 1 second. Okay. I'm back. All right, so where were we? Yes, Moscow, Muscovy. Muscovy is going to rise as a major trading center because it is mostly going to be this spot that all the tribute in the Eastern European parts of the Mongol Empire are being collected. So we do see that Moscow will grow in its economic and, as we'll see in just a second, political role. Because remember, one of the things that the Mongols did was essentially allow for local administration to continue as long as tribute was being paid. I think that's something you all got and understood in Unit 2, hopefully. But eventually, we do see that Moscow is beginning to say, hey, I don't want to have to pay tribute anymore. I'm going to declare my independence. And we do start to see that there is this pushback against Mongol rule in Russia, in Eastern Europe, broadly speaking. And we do see at the Battle of Kulkova in the 1380s that we have Moscow kind of emerging as a independent state. The Mongols haven't been completely driven out, but Moscow, at the very least, is free. Yay, good for them. Sorry. All right. So we do see eventually that the Mongols are going to be eventually kicked out by the 1480s by a guy we'll talk about in just a second. But the Mongols are going to essentially be gone from Eastern Europe by the 1480s. They're going to kind of move back into Central Asia, into Siberia, as we'll talk about in just a second, and also to parts like Crimea as well. That's where the group known as the Tatars are going to be relocated. And Tatar essentially is another name, you could say. That's another Central Asian nomadic group that's related to the Mongols. Yeah, that oftentimes kind of Europeans conflate the two together, the Tatars and the Mongols. But by the 1480s, yes, Eastern Europe, no more Mongols. Yay. But kind of some other things about Russia important to kind of refresh is that one of the big cultural influences on Russia is their Byzantine identity, as related to the culture of the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire is gone at this point. Nobody recognizes them anymore. The Ottomans are in charge of Constantinople. But we do see that kind of the legacy of the Byzantine Empire will continue with the Russians, as we'll talk about in a second. But another thing that's important to understand about Russia is that for much of its history, until what we'll talk about towards the end of today, it really is going to be culturally and economically isolated from Western Europe, from Central Asia. Oh, there's lots of connections, baby. But from Western Russia, or from Western Europe, I should say, there's a lot of political and cultural isolation. And that's due to a variety of factors. For one thing, Russia, kind of under the Mongol yoke, as the Russians called it, they're not going to experience the Renaissance, that celebration of humanism and secularism, until kind of later in their existence. We'll talk about that in just a second. The other kind of thing that's different from Western Europe is the continued importance of the Orthodox Church, of the Eastern Orthodox, or the Russian Orthodox Church, more accurately, in, well, Russia. But we also do see that until the events we'll talk about in just a second, there's going to be little economic activity between Russia and the West. All right. So let's look at kind of how a lot of these things are going to change. And we're going to look at political centralization under what we call the Russian Tsardom. And a Tsardom is, well, it's a kingdom, but ruled over by a Tsar. It's just the official name of the Tsar, of the empire at this point. So who is going to found the structure that will eventually become the Tsardom of Russia? Well, it's going to be this great guy right here, Ivan. And Ivan is another example of a kind of absolutist monarch. And he's actually going to be the one who lays the groundwork for what will become Russia as a major land-based empire. But we're going to look in just a second at how he's doing that. Well, for one thing, Ivan is the guy who actually kicked out the Mongols. He was victorious in defeating the Mongol presence in Eastern Europe and drove them to Central Asia. So a lot of people will respect Ivan for doing that. And as such, he's going to kind of say, in order to establish my popularity, I'm going to declare myself Tsar of Muscovy. So he is going to be one of the earliest rulers in Russian history to use the title of Tsar, actually. But he's going to do other things to kind of demonstrate his authority, newfound authority, after removing the Mongol yoke from Moscow. Well, for one thing, he is going to kind of demonstrate this wealth and power by building up renovating, I should say. It's already kind of structure's already there, by renovating a structure known as the Kremlin. And you might have heard of this in the news before. But the Kremlin describes this kind of royal palace fortress sort of combination thing in the center of Moscow. And he is going to establish kind of, this is the center of our Russian-speaking society. Yes, this is the center of the Duchy of Muscovy. This is our center of our society. And the Kremlin is going to see a lot of architectural designs. We see the building of that famous clock tower that you might have seen before. That's kind of more associated with Ivan's successors, but he does build the groundwork for it. But one of the structures he does build, he builds a lot of churches. This is the Dormiton Church in Kievan, not the Kievan Rus, in the Kremlin. But he's going to kind of build all this architecture in the city of Moscow to kind of continue on the legacy of the Byzantines, and more accurately, the Roman Empire. There's this idea by Ivan and future czars that in order to kind of solidify our power, we need to harken back to the wonderful glory days of the classical period. He's going to say that basically, since the Byzantine Empire is no more, that the center of the Orthodox world is actually now in Moscow. So he's going to call Moscow the Third Rome, basically. He's going to say, this is the legacy of the Roman Empire. We are the Roman Empire 3.0. And that, again, is kind of a big continuity and something similar about a lot of these land-based empires. is that they do harken back to the legacy of an earlier classical era society. The Holy Roman Empire, obviously the Roman Empire. We have the Byzantines, who they're dead now, but they harken back to the Romans as well. We have the Ottomans. They also went back and hearkened to the Roman Empire. They say that they're the third Rome. And the Russians now, they're saying we're the third Rome. The Safavids, they're saying that they're the successor to the Persian Empire. So we do have a lot of land-based empires kind of basing their legitimacy on earlier empires. We also see that Ivan is going to have a lot of political influence over the religious world as well. It keeps in line with that idea of Caesaropapism, that idea that the church, the Orthodox Church, is basically kind of another wing of the Russian government, you could say. So yes, we do see a lot of continuity with earlier societies, kind of the use of Byzantine culture to demonstrate cultural legacy and cultural legitimacy. This actually becomes the new seal of Ivan's empire. It is a hearkening back to the Byzantines, this double-headed eagle right here. And it is a direct callback, a direct throwback, you could say, a direct throwback Thursday to the Byzantine Empire. We're the third Rome. If the Byzantines were number 2, we're number 3. But we're going to see kind of that this influence of Moscow is going to expand, and we're going to see kind of the creation of a more recognizable Russian society. We begin to see Moscow will greatly expand beyond the city and to include other parts of the Russian-speaking world, including places like Kiev, including places like Novgorod, or Novgorod. Wait, no, that's the Witcher place. Novgorod. Yes. All right. So let's look at the grandson, actually, of Ivan III, Ivan the Great, and we're going to look at Ivan the Terrible. Well, he's not terrible because he's a bad ruler. Well, I mean, he's probably a morally bad ruler, but he's an effective one, and we'll see why he's called the Terrible in just a second. But what is Ivan IV going to do to the Russian society, towards the Russian Tsardom? Well, Ivan IV is probably one of the best examples of an absolute monarch in Eastern European history. He is going to be a very brutal ruler, as we'll see in a second, but he is going to centralize power in the hands of his ruling family, the Rurik dynasty. It's calling back to the Kievan Rus, actually. But he's going to be one of the first czars that will unite the Russian-speaking people. So he is going to greatly expand the territory of Moscow. He is going to include other Russian-speaking societies. But he's also going to expand beyond beyond Eastern Europe, and he's going to actually go into Siberia, into Central Asia. And he's going to take over different khanates that are still lingering around right next to the Russian Tsardom. He is going to take over key other Tatar or Mongol khanates, and he is going to greatly expand the borders of the Russian Tsardom. It's not all the way as we see it today. That's going to be under future rulers, but he does expand Russian territory significantly. The kind of motivation that Ivan has for expanding the territory is mostly because he wants to actually establish Russia. I can call it Russia now. He wants to establish Russia as a society that is trading diplomatically and economically with our boys in Western Europe. He is going to be very motivated in getting into and tapping into the fur trade. He wants to kill really cute animals called the minks. Personally, no, not personally. He wants to, he wants to expand into fur area. He wants to get that fur so he can sell it off to Western Europe. But he also is a good old Orthodox boy, and he wants to spread Christian Orthodoxy, Russian Orthodoxy. But he's going to be able to do that using a professionalized military. Yes, he is going to use a group known as the Cossacks. And who are the Cossacks? Well, the Cossacks are a Slavic ethnic group. They are a Russian-speaking Slavic ethnic group that has nomadic roots. but they are going to kind of be the basis of the Russian military, starting under Ivan IV. He is going to establish basically an alliance with them. And that in exchange for independence and autonomy, relative autonomy, that is, you can do whatever you want on your land. You can do whatever you want on your territory, as long as I can call on you to do whatever military service I want you to do, basically. So the Cossacks are going to be a gunpowder-based cavalry. They are going to be very instrumental in allowing for the spread of the Russians' borders into Siberia. And on top of that, Siberia is also going to be the location of colonization for Russians who are going to move into Siberia, kind of displacing Central Asian nomadic groups. So yes, the expansion of the Russian Empire is going, or well, the Russian Tsardom at this point, is going to kind of come at the cost of Central Asian nomads who are kicked off of their land as Russian colonists come into being. So yes, Russia will greatly expand under Ivan IV into Siberia. But Ivan is not called the Terrible just because his beard is really weird, but because he was a very brutal ruler. We see that in a variety of different ways. For one thing, he is going to centralize power by taking away the power of the boyars, of the nobility. But he's going to do that in a variety of ways. He is going to ensure complete loyalty to the to himself through establishing a secret police, a police known as the forgive my Russian for all you Russian speakers, but Opchinichia, I think. I don't know. Maybe that's how you say it. Who knows? But the Opchinichia, however you say it, is a secret police, basically. It's one of the first in the world, but it does demonstrate that absolute monarchs tend to kind of expand the power of the government to include things like censorship. It will root out suspected political opponents to Ivan. He also is going to create the foundations for Siberia being used as what we call a penal colony. Essentially, a penal colony is a colony where prisoners are sent to do, well, colonial things, including economic infrastructure building. So a lot of free labor going on under this penal system in the Russian Tsardom under Ivan IV. So yes, he's a very brutal guy. As you can see in the picture, I'll talk about that in a second, but he's going to actually kill his own son, but I'll talk about that in a second. So the boyars are going to take away, or they are going to have their power taken away by Ivan IV. Basically, anyone who isn't directly loyal to Ivan is going to face a lot of political scrutiny. He is a very brutal ruler, and as such, he is going to greatly decrease the power of the nobility and centralize authority in himself. But Ivan was also a terrible dad, actually. He is going to kill his own son right there. He sticks him through with a pike, a very sharp stick. And the image right there, obviously, kind of an interpretation. He expresses regret about that. But that's a bad idea, killing a son if you're a king, if you're a czar, I guess, because sons are your successors. And Ivan is not going to have a good successor. His successor transfers over to his nephew, some guy named Fedor, and Fedor is really sickly and he's going to die pretty soon, actually. But Ivan IV not going to establish a clear line of succession. He is going to, in fact, create the conditions for a civil war. And this kind of civil war in Russian history, it's not the Russian Civil War, that's something we'll talk about later, but this kind of conflict between different people claiming that they're the successors to the Tsardom, they're going to fight each other, and we're going to see a period of Russian history known as the Time of Troubles. And basically, the Time of Troubles is going to see a decline in the Tsardom's influence that both Ivans really sought to create in their centralization efforts. So the Time of Troubles is going to be a civil war about who is going to succeed Ivan IV, and it is going to result in Russia losing territory, but it's also going to result in eventually a certain guy winning. And this guy, well, he belongs to a family known as the Romanovs. And the Romanovs, as we're going to see in a second, they're going to be the ones who will declare victory during the Time of Troubles, and they're going to establish yet another powerful ruling family in Russian history. Again, a characteristic of absolutism. So you should be able to kind of describe the impact of both of these Ivans. Their name, I think, is like Ivan Vasilievich, or at least for Ivan the Fourth, anyway. Ivan Vasilievich Rurik, I believe. I love the Russians. All right, that probably shouldn't be. I shouldn't say that because that might be taken out of context in our current socio-political environment. Anyway, let's keep going. Yes, so we saw the decline of the Russian Tsardom, but it is going to be the political basis for what will become the Russian Empire. So this is kind of a continuity with the system that was created by those Ivans we just talked about. So yes, let's look at the Romanov dynasty. As you can see on those dates right there, they're going to last a long time, well into the 20th century, until a little bit of a thing called the Russian Revolution, but we'll talk about that later. So yes, the Romanov dynasty, as we'll see in a second, it is going to be the powerful ruling dynasty for much of Russian imperial history. It's founded by this smug-looking dude with the anime eyes, Mikhail Romanov, and he is going to kind of reestablish political order during the time after the time of troubles. He is going to also found a centralized absolutist monarchy, or tsardom, I should say, under the rulership of the Romanov dynasty. And he is going to kind of secure support and secure peace within the Russian society by giving land to loyal boyars. And these boyars can do whatever the heck they want on their land, basically. And he is going to then start the process for further expanding Russian territory by regaining all that lost territory lost during the time of troubles when other powers outside of Russia stole Russian territory. So yes, we will talk about the Romanovs more later on, but they are going to be a very powerful ruling family that is going to last quite some time. And we'll talk about them and how they all get shot in a basement by 1917. But the most prominent, we're going to look at two prominent Romanovs in just a second, both of them being very great rulers. And we're first going to look at Peter right here, because Peter is going to be the traditional founder of the Russian Empire. He's going to build on the legacy of Mikhail and the other Ivans, of Ivan III and IV, and he's going to formally establish what will be known in history as the Russian Empire. So Peter is going to greatly expand Russia's borders. He is going to further expand into Siberia, taking up that land for the fur trade. He's also going to kind of use the religious identity as being the kind of protector of the Russian Orthodox Church by fighting against the Ottomans. Peter is obsessed with reclaiming Constantinople. He's never going to do it, but he's going to engage in a lot of wars with the Ottomans to try and solidify his authority as a good old Orthodox boy, as a good Orthodox Christian. But he's also going to fight other European powers, actually. He's going to fight with Sweden during an event called the Northern War, or the Great Northern War. And the real goal of this war is to gain what we call a warm water port. Russia, if you didn't know, is cold, and it does oftentimes have ports that will freeze in the winter. And that's a bad thing if you want to expand your power economically. So he is going to declare war on Sweden, and he's going to win, actually. And it's kind of surprising. Everyone's like, Russia winning against Sweden? That's ridiculous. Oh my gosh. But he is going to win, and he is going to seize the land that will become the new capital of the Russian Empire, named after himself, St. Petersburg. And St. Petersburg, as we'll talk about in just a second, going to be the center of the Russian Empire. It's going to be the center of the Russian Empire, but it's also a warm water port. It is a port that has regular access to the ocean without it freezing all year round. Well, in winter, I guess. But how is Peter the Great going to solidify his rule? Well, Peter the Great is best associated with a term known as Westernization. Westernization essentially is the process by which you become more like Western Europe. And he's going to do that in order to solidify, to centralize power. He's noticing, I said that really weird, he's noticing what guys like Louis XIV are doing. And remember, Louis XIV was centralizing his absolute power. So he is going to kind of model himself off of the legacy of Louis XIV. He's going to create a stronger bureaucracy, a stronger system to collect taxes and enforce a census. He's going to seize power away from the boyars that was given to them under Mikhail Romanov. And he's also, again, going to move the capital of the Russian Empire to some swamp called St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg is going to be the center of his newfound Russian Empire. He's going to model it off of cities like Paris and Venice and London. It's going to be filled with monumental architecture, again, a characteristic of absolutism, like the Winter Palace. And it's this really beautiful structure right here. This is going to be the winter home, you could say, of the Russian the Russian monarchy. And it, again, very much styled on the model of Versailles, of these Western European societies. This painting right here is Peter supposedly looking for the spot to build St. Petersburg. And like I mentioned before, it literally is built on a swamp. And they literally have to dig canals to make this city work because it is built on a swamp. My sister actually was in St. Petersburg studying one year, and she got locked out of a certain area because the canal bridges were up. Anyway, that's a small tangent. But again, Peter is going to be an absolute monarch because of his use of a professionalized military. He's going to continue using the Cossacks to greatly expand his borders. But Peter is not only going to westernize politically, and again, I would say that that's the successful part of centralization. He does have a lot of political power for himself, and he does have a stronger bureaucracy. But in terms of society and the economy, well, he might not be as successful. And again, you can make your interpretation he was successful, but I'll take the argument that he wasn't. In terms of the economy, his attempt to westernize the economy is the attempt to modernize it, to make it less based on agriculture and more based on trade, just like Western Europe. Western Europe is very strong. Why not make our economy very strong by becoming involved in these overland and overseas trade networks? Well, his goal essentially is to make sure that Russia can industrialize. Russia can not be dependent on borrowing stuff from its Western European friends. So the goal is to make it self-sufficient, able to industrialize, able to produce its own manufactured products. It's not going to work for the most part, mostly because of this intense power given that the nobility still has. Even though Peter is taking away power from the boyars, the nobility still does have a lot of power, especially over the economy. There's going to be government attempts to industrialize and build up factories, especially for military use, and that is successful. But in terms of consumer products, in terms of kind of things purchased by, say, the everyday people of the country, not so much. There's not much in the way of industrialization. In terms of culture, Peter is again going to westernize, or at least attempt to westernize, to modernize his society. And he is going to try and bring what he considers ideal culture of the powerful monarchies of France and Spain into Russia. He's going to kind of import ballet. He's going to import Western artists to revitalize Russian art. And you can kind of see these pictures of Russian art that I've been showing throughout this lesson today. Look, it's not that good. Well, in terms of perspective anyway. But with Peter the Great bringing in Western artists, he introduces this more realistic style that we saw in his not his self-portrait, but his portrait right here. So there is an attempt to try and improve, or I should say, westernize the culture of his society to reflect these powerful empires out west in Western Europe. He's also going to do this funny thing called a beard tax, where essentially he's going to say, beards are not a cool thing in Western Europe. It's not a fashionable thing, but it still is a cultural thing among Russian nobles. So if you want to keep your beard, you still have to pay a tax. You have to pay a tax. And if you want to be in my court, if you want to enjoy kind of all these court ceremonies, I'm going to have to cut off your beard. So there was actually a lot of beard cutting going on that was forced by Peter the Great, and that's a little funny. However, much of this kind of cultural westernization is mostly going to happen among elite circles, mostly among the nobility. So the nobility is going to largely westernize, the monarchy is going to largely westernize, but not everyday people, not the peasants. Mostly this is a upper elite sort of thing, this westernization. The other big absolute monarch of Russian history is going to be this lady right here, a little bit of a lady representation in Russian history. Her name is Catherine the Great. And why is she the Great? Well, we're going to see in just a second. But Catherine is going to be another example of westernization and absolutism at the same time. She's actually a bit of a girl boss. She's going to allegedly organize the assassination of her husband, not her brother, her husband, and she does become the tsarina after he dies, after Peter III is assassinated under mysterious circumstances. She might have killed him. Anyway, well, she's going to kind of continue and build off the legacy of her predecessor, Peter the Great. She wasn't married to Peter. It's just there's a lot of Peters in Russian history. She's after Peter the Great. But she is going to continue Peter the Great's territorial expansion by essentially kind of modeling what the Western Europeans are doing. Western Europeans are building North American colonies. Guess what she's going to do? She's also going to build North American colonies in Alaska and as far as Northern California, what is today Northern California. So we do see this attempt to expand territorially. We do see a lot more Central Asia taken. We see parts of North America taken, all because of Catherine right here. She's continuing that westward, well, I guess eastward expansion of the Russian Empire. But she's also going to continue to westernize. She really wants Russia to be one of those great powers of Europe, on par with Britain or France or Spain. She wants to be another European power on par with those other wonderful powers. But she's also going to try and emulate the current the current philosophical trend at the time of the Enlightenment. And Catherine is actually an example of what we would call an enlightened despot. She is going to be a absolute monarch that will kind of make some reforms that reflect the Enlightenment, actually. So she will kind of see, oh, these Western European societies, they're going through the Enlightenment. They're doing things like abolishing serfdom. They're doing things like, what else? They're granting religious freedom. They're granting the right to a jury, all these legal protections. Wow, that's awesome. Why don't I do that too? Because all the cool kids are doing it. I'm going to do it too, basically. And she is going to kind of introduce a lot of kind of legislation that will protect basic natural rights in something called the Instruction of 1767. Pretty cool, right? Yeah, right? Well, we are going to see kind of pushback against this, mostly because if you give a little bit of natural rights, if you give a peasant some natural rights, that is going to lead to internal conflict of people saying, why don't we get more rights? Why do we have an absolute monarchy? Why don't we have a system that's more fair and representative of everyday people? Why don't we get rid of serfdom? You promised to get rid of serfdom, but you didn't. Oh my God, Catherine, why did you do that to me? Well, anyway, all these kind of concerns of needing more natural rights and wanting more representation and more kind of economic privileges, economic freedom for serfs especially, is going to actually lead to an intense kind of demand for these desires, for these natural rights. And that's going to lead to actually a rebellion called Pugachev's Rebellion in the 1770s. However, this is going to make Catherine realize, I can't grant natural rights to people. That's just going to mean revolution, rebellion. Wow, look what's going on in North America during 1776. They're having a little bit of a revolution. That's bad. That means I'm going to have my power taken away from me. So she's actually going to stop all those reforms after that rebellion right there. So we do kind of see that Russia will be an absolute monarchy, one that does have a lot of control over social, economic, and political sayings. It's not going to be really a open and equal society, as we will definitely explore more later on, this Russian Empire. There's a reason why the Russian Revolution happens. That's all I'm going to say for now. But we've looked at the political trends. Let's look at the state of the economy and society in Russia by the 1750s. Well, as you might see in that image right there, there's going to be a lot of poverty in Russia because serfdom is going to actually still exist in Russia. Remember, serfdom is going to largely go away in Russia not until the 1800s. It's going to stick around until the 1860s, actually. Whereas in Western Europe, it mostly has been gone by this point in world history, by the 1700s. So we do kind of see that in exchange for loyalty by the nobility, that rulers like Catherine, rulers like Peter, are going to grant their nobles basically the power to do whatever they want with their serfs. So we do see that serfdom is a big part of Russian society. It's a way to ensure that the nobles, that the boyars, are supporting the royalty, the absolute monarchs, the czars of Russia. So serfdom politically is supported by our guys, by the Russian czars and tsarinas like Catherine. So in addition to serfdom being kind of a huge institution, I mean, half of Russians, all Russians, are serfs by the 1800s. That's a huge amount. We never really saw that even in Western Europe. Serfdom is a big part of Russian society. But also a big part of Russian society, since serfdom is such a big part of that, is that agriculture, by extension, is also a big part of Russian society. Russia is largely not going to industrialize, even though Western Europe largely is by the 1800s. So we do see that Russia is very slow to industrialize. It is much more of an agricultural focus, much more of a focus on getting furs from cute little animals like minks and ermines. And another big thing about the Russian kind of society is that there is no real middle class. There is no bourgeoisie, this merchant middle class that exists in Russian society, really, until the 1900s, actually. And most of these merchants that do conduct trade, well, they're from foreign places. They're from France or England. They're not Russians themselves. So we do see that kind of the Russian economy is really stalled because of the lack of industrialization, because of this entrenchment of serfdom. So I want you to consider this question right here. In what ways would you say that Westernization was successful? Was it successful? Was it not successful? Why or why not? Maybe it was successful in one area, maybe it wasn't successful in other areas. All right, well, thank you for listening. That was Unit 3. Yay, whoopee, woohoo, yay. So yes, remember to do the unit worksheet. Remember to do the unit cover page. Remember to practice on AP Classroom. Remember to, do all those things. Have a great day. I hope you enjoy talking about Russia. Excellent. All right. And I'd show a video in class, but I'm not going to right now anyway. Have a good day. Bye.